sometimes. Dark Crystal fucked a lot of us up at young age. I was like, peanut butter solution. Anyways, yeah, shout out to Calgary HorrorCon. Hopefully you checked it out today. A lot of cool vendors, a lot of cool guests. But yeah, when we heard Joe Bob Briggs was coming to town, Cuff thought, holy shit, how can we have Joe Bob Briggs in Calgary and not show a movie? And so Joe Bob's first pick was Bubba Hotep, which we showed at the Halloween Marathon. Fantastic film. He's showing as part of the Jamboree, I believe, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, hell yeah, Elvis is relevant again, folks. Next is Night of the Demons, and shit, I fought hard to try to find that movie, y'all, but no one has the rights to it. Show Factor doesn't even know who has the rights to Night of the Demons. So if you know who does, do a 4K up, convert to that, so you can make some money. But the third pick, Jim Wynorski's Chopping Mall. You know it, you love it, formerly titled Kill Bots. I'm Cam from Cuff. Thanks for supporting us. We do a lot of off-season events. Follow us on Facebook. Without further ado, the man who has proven that the drive-in will never die, Joe Bob Briggs.
Here, I'm going to talk for a while. Is that okay?
Yeah!
I've never introduced a movie in Calgary before, so I need to figure out where you guys are on the nerdism scale. Because the nerdism scale runs from cities where I go to where, you know, at one end of the scale you have Evil Dead is awesome, man. And that's your basic garden variety 80s nerd. And then at the other end of the scale, we have Chud 2 Bud the Chud, one of the most underrated movies in history. It's a crime. It's not more highly regarded. And that would be your nerd group that has entered into a collective geek psychosis, not witnessed since the creation of the Hitler Youth. So, the pertinent test question tonight is, how many people in this audience know who Jim Wynorski is? Okay, I think the Sudetenland is safe. Jim Wynorski is the director of tonight's movie. This was his second movie, and then he made 150 more movies after that. He's shooting one right now called Revenge of the 50-Foot Cam Girl, which comes hot on the heels of his most recent release, Bigfoot or Bust. And the bust part refers to large-breasted women traveling from the future to capture Sasquatch. So, he's been doing this stuff for 40 years. He's a genius. Now, I know virtually, I would say 90% of the people involved with this movie, I know. And so I'm going to go pretty deep on the movie, if you don't mind. Chopping Mall is kind of a who's who of B movies in the 80s, including the most famous and popular character actor of that era, Dick Miller. You all know Dick Miller, right? Dick Miller makes a brief appearance in the movie, and by the way, you need to be hyper alert at the beginning of this movie, because quite a few horror icons appear in the first 20 minutes of the movie. In fact, in the first 5 minutes, there's probably like 8 of them. So, but Dick plays the janitor, who gets french fried by the sarcastic robot using the same character name, Walter Paisley, that he used in Bucket of Blood a quarter century earlier. So Dick Miller was sort of the ultimate Roger Corman actor. And Roger Corman being the greatest exploitation producer in the history of film. You guys do know Roger Corman, right? Roger is 96 and still making movies, all right? So he's as serious as Jim is about this stuff. Dick Miller was in dozens of Corman movies and other low-budget movies, and since Jim Wynorski was a worshiper of Roger Corman, he wanted every Corman reference he could make in this movie, because this was his first chance to make a movie for Roger Corman. So, and actually, he didn't know this, but Roger doesn't even like that. He doesn't like people putting references to his former movies in movies that you're making for him. And so, but Jim didn't know that, and so he kind of fucked up on this first one. So anyway, Wynorski and his co-screenwriter, a guy named Steve Mitchell, had met in the 60s at a comics convention in New York. And both of them ended up heading out to California to seek their fortunes in the movie industry. And it took a while, but Wynorski eventually got an entry-level job at Roger Corman's company, which was called New World Pictures at the time he started working there. And he started cutting trailers for New World in 1980. And he moved up to director of publicity And then this is how Roger used people. He made them do all the grunt jobs before they got to direct, and they had to edit 2 movies before they could be a director. And then Jim made his first film in 1984, The Lost Empire, female gladiators in bikinis. Who could resist that, right? And then this is his second film, and he would go on to make such low-budget classics as Big Bad Mama 2, Not of This Earth with Tracy Lords, The Return of Swamp Thing, Dinosaur Island, The Haunting of Morella, Transylvania Twist, a bunch of erotic thrillers. Remember when every other movie in the 90s was an erotic thriller? Bunch of erotic thrillers. Point of Seduction, Body Chemistry 3. Not to be confused with Body Chemistry 4, Full Exposure. 7 world premieres on Sci-Fi, including Gargoyle, Curse of the Komodo, Project Viper, Cry of the Winged Serpent, Cobra Gator with Michael Madsen. And then he did a lot of sex movies for TV, the Skinamax type movies, softcore sex movies. Whenever you see the names Sam Pepperman, Rip Masters, or Harold Blueberry, all of those are Jim Wynorski working in the sex film area. Jim was great at sexual rip-off titles. Jim made The Devil Wears Nada, House on Hooter Hill, Bear Winch, The Final Chapter, The Witches of Brestwick, and my favorite, The Hills Have Thighs. So, Jim Wynorski, he's a New Yorker, and his first job was shooting commercials for the Jumbotron at the stadium where the New York Mets played. He always wanted to go to LA and direct real movies, but he couldn't get hired until he landed a job on a TV series called Breaking Away. I don't think anybody remembers this series, but in 1979 there was a TV series called Breaking Away, shot on location in Athens, Georgia, and so he got fired the first week he was working on it. But on the plane ride back to LA, he sat next to a producer named Marcy Gross, and she introduced him to Roger Corman, and he was in such awe of Roger Corman that he told Corman he would do anything to work there, and of course that's exactly what Roger wants to hear. And so pretty soon he was cutting trailers and doing PR, and finally a half-decade later, Roger let him direct. Now, to show you what a Corman fan he was, he had seen Attack of the Crab Monsters 100 times before he went to work for Roger. This movie was actually produced by Roger's wife, Julie Corman, the producer of many of the Stranger films put out by the time this was made, the company, Roger had a habit, I have to always explain this, Roger had a habit of selling his company for millions of dollars and then opening a new one across the street the next day. And so New World became New Horizons, and that became Concord, and then that became New Concord. Every time he would sell his library, he would just cross the street, open a new company. So this was a New Horizons film, and the reason that this was made is that Julie Corman had a meeting with a company called Vestron Video. Does anybody remember Vestron Video, the mom and pop video era? And for some reason, Vestron Video wanted a horror movie that was set in a mall. That was their idea. So Jim Wynorski at the time was the PR guy for New Horizons, but he'd always wanted to direct. So Julie told him, if you come up with a script over the weekend, you can have the job. So Wynorski and his writing partner, Steve Mitchell, wrote the basic outlines of this story in 24 hours. They wrote it in Coco's Restaurant in Santa Monica, California. I don't think it's there anymore, but that was one of those open all-night restaurants. And now, Wynorski says he had 2 inspirations for the movie, Trapped and Gog. Now, I don't know which Trapped he was thinking about. There's 30 movies called Trapped, you know. But Gog is the only previous movie about experimental robots running amok that I know of. Richard Egan is the secret agent scientist investigating the secret underground space research facility in Arizona where these outer space aliens are manipulating Gog and Magog, the evil robots that are determined to start nuclear war. Now, the stakes are a little higher in Gog than in Chopping Mall. Gog and Magog are actually the superpowers that show up to destroy Israel in the book of Ezekiel. So really, Chopping Mall has biblical origins. So anyway, they wrote the script outline, they gave it to Julie the next day, she approved it. The picture was greenlit for about $800,000, which is quite a bit, even that was a lot for Roger Corman to spend. But that was done all in 2 weeks' time, and then they shot pretty much the whole thing at the Galleria Mall in Sherman Oaks, California. The movie was made, this was the heyday of the go-go, let's make a movie 80s. Fuck, you know, after the VHS revolution, you could pretty much make up a movie plot on Monday, get it funded on Tuesday, cast it on Wednesday, and start shooting it on Thursday. So the script was written in about 4 weeks, and because it was two New Yorkers writing it together, their system was this. Wynorski tells this story. Okay, why don't we take your idea, which I hate, and combine it with my idea, which you hate? You know, so, and that's how they put the story together. They originally planned to shoot this at the Beverly Center, famous shopping center in LA, but Beverly Center wanted too much money. They wanted things like insurance, you know. And so they moved the killer robots to Sherman Oaks, California, and the rest is history. Now, it was released under the title Killbots, and it ran 90 minutes, and it did not do well in its test runs during a limited test run period. So Roger Corman took it into the editing room, said, we're going to shorten it up, we're going to make it better, and while they were doing that, somebody came into the room to change the light bulbs, and he said, why don't you just call it Chopping Mall? Nobody even remembers who it was, with some random employee at New Horizons. So Roger liked that name, and the new ad campaign was born, and history was made, even though the title makes no sense because there is no chopping in the movie. Chopping implies knife wounds or axe wounds, and what we have here is laser wounds. But it became one of the most beloved films in the sub-genre called mall horror, which would include such titles as Dawn of the Dead. The Great Dawn of the Dead is a mall horror movie. Phantom of the Mall, and The Initiation. Oh, and Night of the Comet actually is a mall movie. If you include supermarkets as in the mall sub-genre, Intruder or The Mist. You know, one of my plans for the future is to sponsor Mall Horror Night in a mall, in an abandoned mall. You know, because there are lots of those now. And so anyway, Roger cut 15 minutes out of the original print, which horrified Wynorski at the time. But the result, 77 minutes, turned out to be the perfect length and the magic number. And by the way, why can't they do that anymore? Why does every horror movie today have to be 110 fucking minutes? You know, not that this is even necessarily a classic horror movie, but it's more like an action thriller with some horror elements. And why do special effects have to cost umpteen jillion dollars? The real stars of this movie are robots, and a guy named Robert Short, made these robots out of wheelchair frames and pieces of conveyor belt. So, and they look amazing, and they operated on a 12 volt car battery and some electric wheelchair motors. They just had fiberglass over an aluminum shell. And of course, they had to overcrank the film speed to make them look fast because they could only travel 8 miles an hour. But, and the arms and hands of the robots were grabber claw toys from Japan. And the bodies were supported by roller skate wheels. All right, but you'll see how great they look if you haven't seen the movie. Is anybody here who has not seen the movie? A few, okay, I'm trying not to do any spoilers, all right. Like you can spoil this, right? All right. Let's talk about the cast. One legend after another. There is a blow dart to the neck scene. How many people? All right, you know what I'm talking about. The character who takes the blow dart to the neck is legendary character actor Garrett Graham. Garrett Graham came in and did that little part for $600. Jim Wynorski was starstruck by all these B-movie actors that he got to work with, and he was especially fond of Garrett Graham because of his sleazy salesman role in Used Cars, if you've seen that movie. But this audience would probably remember him best as the aforementioned Bud the Chud in Chud 2. And you Chud 2 fans, by the way, I heard you cheering when I said that. Chud 2 fans are sick. You know who you are. All right. And also Garrett was in Phantom of the Paradise. He was the rock star in Phantom of the Paradise. And he was the jerk foster dad in Child's Play 2. Anyway, hundreds of roles for Garrett Graham. Now this movie has a bunch of insider references. In the first scene, we have Paul Bartel and Mary Warrenoff as the sarcastic couple. They're sitting together. They're basically doing their roles from the movie Eating Raoul. If you've seen that movie, they were supposed to do another scene where they arrive at the mall with a horse, and they're planning to cut up the horse and serve it at their diner, but Roger Corman wouldn't pay for a horse. So that scene got cut out. But, you also might recognize Mel Wells, who was in Attack of the Crab Monsters, Jim Wynorski's favorite movie. And he was in Little Shop of Horrors. He's the cook in the diner when you see the diner scene. And if you're paying really close attention, you may notice Angus Scrimm, the tall man in the Phantasm movies. He asked one of the questions in the opening scene. So this is the old teenagers go into a dangerous place, get cut off from civilization, and die one by one story. Only they go into what should be a happy place, the mall. And there's no Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers killer. There's just these little demonic R2-D2s. And if they have sex, they die, of course. These are robots that don't like teenagers having sex. Although they aren't really teenagers, of course, because in the time-honored tradition of Hollywood, teens are always played by actors in their late 20s. You will notice that this movie has ghost breasts. What are ghost breasts, you may ask? Ghost breasts are naked women, totally unconnected to the plot, often not identified at all, who randomly walk through scenes. For example, this movie has a locker room, because of course all malls have a locker room where you go to change your clothes. And in this locker room, Allison and Susie, played by Kelly Maroney and Barbara Crampton, two 80s scream queen icons, are getting dressed, and random naked girls just walk behind them. There are also bikini girls who, for no apparent reason, all get on the mall escalator together. And the lead bikini girl is played by the great Tony Naples, star of many Jim Wynorski films like Deathstalker 2, Hard to Die, Transylvania Twist, Dinosaur Island, and Sorceress. Hope you're taking notes on this. It's going to be a test later. And then there's Susie Slater. Okay? There wasn't a big cheer that went up for Susie, and I'll tell you why. Okay, there's one guy. You've watched that scene, Tim. Okay. Susie Slater is famous for two scenes, and they're both in this one movie. And I have to say, I thought this movie would launch Susie Slater into drive-in superstardom, but Kelly Maroney, by the way, was already a drive-in superstar. But one of the best reasons to watch this movie is the debut performance of Susie Slater's Garbanzos right before they get lasered by a killer maniac robot in an exploding head scene in the Galleria Shopping Center. Susie could have been a drive-in queen, but she had a very brief career. She got stuck in this flick just long enough to become a grease spot on the linoleum, but plenty long enough to make us remember her aardvarking scene at the Furniture King store. And it takes about 9,000 tries before they explode Susie's head with pink laser bolts. But Wynorski, by the way, considers that scene the second greatest exploding head in history. The first, he gives credit to the first to your fellow Canadian David Cronenberg for his exploding head in Scanners. So anyway, Susie Slater disappears from movie history right after this picture. All we know is that she was a Kansas girl, University of Nebraska cheerleader, a flight attendant, a swimsuit model. She had 3 Playboy pictorials. She did a lot of bombshell walk-on roles, and then she vanished. But you say today, remember Susie Slater, to somebody who was around at that time, and people can't place her, and you just go, chopping mall, exploding head. And they go, oh, yeah, that girl, hot. You know, so if your most memorable moment is your head exploding, and yet people remember how hot you are hot. And of course, the other big 80s star in the movie is Barbara Crampton, who was, she was well known to horror audiences from the Stuart Gordon films Reanimator and From Beyond. But the lead, and the role that she is best known for today, is played by Kelly Maroney. Kelly Maroney was born in Minneapolis. She studied acting at the Guthrie Theater. She worked with the National Shakespeare Company Conservatory in New York. And of course, it was all that Shakespearean training that prepared her for Chopping Mall. And actually, it was a soap opera that prepared her. She was in a soap opera called Ryan's Hope, where she got most of her experience. And she was the evil Lolita. She played this sexy girl role starting when she was 14 years old. She was the Lolita figure in 300 episodes of Ryan's Hope when she was still underage. All right, I want to mention one more guy before we watch the greatest mall-oriented killer robot flick ever made. Many people love the soundtrack for this movie. I think somebody gave it to me today. They own the soundtrack for Chopping Mall. That's Chuck Serino, and he would compose dozens of film soundtracks, but this was his very first soundtrack. And at the time, he was working for Shadow Stevens, who was a famous radio host and a UFO expert. But this was in the 80s, and Shadow Stevens was mostly known for being the pitchman for Federated department stores. But Serino's idea for the music was, what would a robot be thinking? And so the music is a constant flow of these robot brain instructions, which is why it sounds so intense and bombastic. There's also Allison's theme. That was written for Kelly Maroney's most emotional scenes, harp and piano. There's a robot theme, which you hear over and over again. You will not be able to get out of your head once you leave the movie tonight. It sounds like maybe it was a xylophone or marimba or something. And it's a sound you would normally associate with children's animation, actually. So they're kind of happy killer robots. But Chuck Serino still works with Wynorski today. They collaborated on the avant-garde festival film Cobra Gator. Okay, what else? Wynorski himself does the voice of the Killbots. What other actor? Oh, Russell Todd plays Rick. He had become semi-famous in a film called Where the Boys Are, 1984, a remake of the original Where the Boys Are. He was also in He Knows You're Alone and Friday the 13th Part 2. And John Terlesky is the gum-chewing Mike. He worked in several other Wynorski films, but today he's mostly a director. He has a lot of credits as a director of TV series. Okay. Basically what we got here is 3 security guard robots that go berserk during a lightning storm and start using their lasers and throwing stars and tranquilizer guns and F-16 fighter planes to kill teenagers that they catch making the sign of the triple hump squid puppy after hours in the mall. After each body demolition they say, "Thank you, have a nice day." In other words, spam in an atrium, and that's the whole plot. So let's go to the drive-in totals. We have 10 dead bodies. 10 dead bodies, 3 dead killbots, 8 breasts, 3 pints of blood, 1 exploding head, 3 twisted metal explosions, kamikaze forklift, gratuitous Paul Bartel, gratuitous Mary Warnoff, gratuitous Dick Miller, fold out foo, pastel laser bolt foo, turpentine foo. Drive-In Academy Award nominations for Jim Wynorski, the writer-director, for casting Kelly Maroney in the lead because he wanted to date her. It's there. Tony O'Dell as Nerdy Ferdy for saying, okay, let's party. Susie Slater as Leslie, the double-breasted United Way agency, for saying, when I'm happy, everybody's happy. Russell Todd as Rick for saying, if we get out here alive, you owe me a 6-pack. Barbara Crampton as Susie the Whiner for saying, but Greg needs me, and then getting french fried on camera. Carrie Emerson as Linda for saying, I'm sorry for getting hysterical. I guess I'm just not used to being chased around a mall in the middle of the night by killer robots. And selling that line. We believe it. And Kelly Maroney, drive-in queen of the 80s, the woman who put the K in Scream Queen, as the romantic lead, the final girl, and the badass with a road flare stuffed down her bra. We're gonna do a Q&A after the movie, but right now I'm gonna give it 3 stars. Joe Bob says, check it out.
Come on, go harder than that, folks. Come on.
Okay. Thank you.